The Beetlejuice project has been calling to me, and it is time to work on it. Recently, I've started working on the second floor, which contains Lydia's room, Charles' office, and Delia and Charles' room. So which one should we work on first? Well, there's only really one Deets member that is currently here, and that's Lydia. So I say we go ahead and work on Lydia's room, specifically Lydia's furniture. All of these rooms on the second floor are going to be incredibly squished because I'm trying to fit a giant set into a tiny dollhouse. So that also means the furniture might need to be a little squished as well. And in this video, you'll see what I mean. Without further ado, let's get started. In my last Beetlejuice update, you may remember I worked on this bathroom. I still have not connected the walls because I still have to make the doors, but today I'm not working on structure. Today I'm working on furniture. So I decided to get a few beds out from the Addams Family house. I used Wednesday's bed previously to lay out this floor, and it's still such a small room. I was able to make a few adjustments when I was working on the floor plan, but this bed still takes up so much space. So I decided to grab Cousin It's bed. Now, Cousin It's bed is a lot smaller because Cousin It is a lot smaller, but I decided to see if it would work. As you can see, it's about 1.5 inches less long, and I was hoping this would give me a little bit more room in Lydia's room. Now, the trick to this is I have to see if it will still look right next to my Lydia figure. Beds are a really interesting thing in dollhouses because, in real life, they take up a lot of space, but they take up a ton of walking space in dollhouse rooms. So you can kind of mess with the measurements of a bed as long as it looks like it could still work for your doll. I have to fit 2 other pieces of furniture in this space and a window, so I'm having to fudge the bed size just a little bit. So I'm going to go with more of a Cousin It size bed and less of a realistic size bed measurement. Lydia's bed has a pretty interesting look, as in it has absolutely no structure. It's basically just a purple lump on the ground. I don't know if the set designers just covered a bunch of boxes with fabric, but that is how it looks. So I'm not going to be doing a lot of structure when it comes to this, which almost makes it a bit more difficult to really make it look like a bed. I'm using some foam board that I'm going to build up, and I've also decided that I'm going to include the lamp that's in the reference into the bed. It's going to be a lot easier for me to control how the lamp stands if it's attached to a larger piece of furniture. I cut a bunch of rectangles, and one of the rectangles has a jut out, and this is going to help support the lamp that's going to be attached to the bed permanently. I'm gluing all the foam board on top of each other to make the bed structure. I realized I could have just made a box, but this works as well, and it gives it some weight to counteract the weight that's going to be in the lamp. Because I'm adding the lamp to the bed, I do need to think about wiring. So the first thing I'm going to do is create some holes where I think the wiring is going to go through. I've never created anything like this, so it's going to be an experiment as I go along. I'm using this purple boba straw to save space because I am going to be building up around it, but I want this opening for wires to go through and not be blocked by anything else. I'm going to glue it in with some hot glue and then start thinking about how I'm going to attach the lamp pole. The lamp pole is just going to be made out of some wood and initially stuck down to the foam board. This is also going to be hot glued in place with a lot of glue that's going to be hidden so that it's very, very strong. I also noticed in the reference that the pillows are kind of popped up at the back, so I added another piece of foam board, which will ultimately be covered up, but will help those pillows stand up around the lamp stand. To cover up the wiring in the back, I am going to add some mat board, so I just measured out a size that would fit, and then I scored it and cut a little hole for the bottom where the wires are going to come out and hopefully connect to the wiring in the center of the dollhouse. I'm going to cut off the edges so that it fits perfectly and then glue it in place. This is going to back up kind of into a corner, so having this corner piece will be fine. You won't really notice it when the bed's in place. So now you can see the straw is a direct connection from the main arm of the lamp down to the bottom of the bed. Now I can start creating the comfort part of the bed. I'm covering it with some quilt batting that's going to conceal all of the foam board and just make it a little softer to the touch when it's picked up. Even though I know a lot of people aren't picking it up, it is very striking to pick up a bed and it be an immediately hard surface underneath it. I added the flat quilt batting all around the outside of the foam board, but on top I want to add some pillow stuffing. And this is because it's supposed to look really fluffy and lumpy, and I just don't know if I could get that effect with the quilt batting. So I'm loosely gluing this on top with some more hot glue and then trimming it to the shape that I want it to be once the fabric is added. I stuffed the back area of the bed with some leftover quilt batting and then covered it up with another sheet of quilt batting so it's completely concealed. And to me, this is starting to look a little bit like a unicorn head, like with the ears and like a little horn coming up out of the top. But hopefully by the time I'm done, that won't be a problem anymore. I decided to coat the foam board parts of the bed in black Mod Podge, and then I kind of got the idea that I wanted to cover the quilt batting in it as well, and it gave a really interesting texture that reminded me of like a fiberglass finish. So I ended up covering all around the bottom of the bed with the black Mod Podge and allowing that to dry. That way, if there is any peeking underneath the blanket, it will just kind of blend in and look like the dark bottom of the bed. Now on to fabric choices. I didn't have a lot in the way of purple, which of course we're going for a purple lumpy bed, so I do think I'm going to have to adjust some fabrics. And I know how to change the color of the fabric, but changing the texture or the fluffiness of it was going to be difficult. So I had to go with the most fluffy fabric, which was this old skirt that used to belong to one of my children. Unfortunately, this makes it a really small piece of fabric, so I had to cut it into as many larger pieces as I could, and then I could start the process of making it a bit more purple. It's almost more of a red maroon with white streaks through it, so I was hoping by adding the purple paint it would really soak into the white parts and start to look a bit more like it did in the reference. Once it had dried completely, I started gluing it onto the bed and being really careful around the fluffy area, making sure it stays nice and lumpy. I'm doing a really rough job of putting this fabric on there. I do realize that, but it was a very difficult bed to dress, I will just say. I'm using my hot glue to go around the bottom edge and just curling it underneath. I made the folds of the skirt go underneath each other to kind of extend the fabric. It doesn't look exactly like the reference. The reference doesn't have those folds, but I do think it adds to the effect that I'm going for. I now need to add the pillows that are going to be sitting up at the end of the bed. I wanted to add a third pillow that was going to be this maroon color, but ignore that one because I end up just going with the two plain pillows. I sewed all around the outside of the fabric and then flipped it inside out and used the same stuffing that I used on the main part of the bed. This was a little difficult to get in there, and I'm not the best at making pillows, but thankfully these pillows did not have to be anything amazing. They just kind of had to be lumpy and bumpy like everything else, and it worked out pretty well. I took the areas of the pillow where you could see the stitching on the outside, made sure to face those on the inside, and then I could glue them in place. I did make that third pillow, but I just didn't like how it was sitting on the bed, so I decided to go with the main two. I added some hot glue on those little pieces I made to prop the pillows up and glued them in place. I also added some glue in between the pillows to make sure they would stick to each other. So here is my lumpy, bumpy purple bed. I am just so happy with how squishy and structureless it looks. Now I can move on to designing and 3D printing the lamp shades that are going to go above the bed. And for this, I'm going to be using the Saturn IV Ultra from Elegoo. This Elegoo printing machine was gifted to me for the purpose of reviewing it, and let me tell you, this thing prints so nice. This was our first test print. I used some white Elegoo resin and of course had to print another chess piece. If you saw my last video, I used one of these in my Alice design. So now I have another one to take its place, and hopefully I'll find another miniature project in the future to use it for. After this quick and easy setup and test print, I was able to print these items that I had created in Tinkercad. I created a Polaroid camera as well for Lydia alongside the lampshades, and then I found a Nikon camera, which I will put the link to that creator's site for the Nikon camera if it's something you're interested in printing. This printer also comes with a camera, and since I print things that are so short, I couldn't test the camera, so I decided to print something huge. I printed this statue, which was so cool, and I will put the footage in the corner on the screen if you want to see it being printed. I think it worked. If it does, I'll put it on there. If it didn't, it's my fault because I turned off the light in the studio without thinking. And I know this really doesn't have anything to do with Beetlejuice, but when I found this print file online, I just had to try to print it, and it came out so beautiful. You'll have to let me know what type of miniature project you might see this in the future. I'm definitely putting it into my collection of miniatures, and it will be some focal point of something, maybe like a little garden area. The print came out beautiful, so many details, it was very, very smooth, and I think it would be a lot of fun to paint and just like put moss and vines all over. So thank you again to Elegoo for gifting me the Saturn IV Ultra to try out. I'm so excited to get to work on these lamps and get them mounted onto the bed. I knew from the start that this was going to be a difficult lamp to create because it's very long and lanky, which can mean that things get really weak and breakable in miniature. So I created these little side loops on the edge of the lamps to hopefully put some barbecue skewers in the future to hold them in place. They are really big. The lamps are really big, and I'll tell you why. I designed them to go around a very specific LED light that is supposed to work with music and sound and go into a big system. It can change color and go on and off as requested. So they're a little bit more complicated than the lights I usually use, but I thought it would be fun to try them out. So this is why the lamps are so big. They're trying to make up for how big the LEDs are. Now, Mr. Technology was very kind, got me my own soldering station, and I tried to solder these myself, and I did solder them myself, I have to say. Now, it didn't quite work out, but I did want to show a little bit of me facing my fear when it comes to soldering and show you my work. When we went to go test these out, only 2 of the lights were working, and we could only get them to be blue. So it wasn't exactly going well, and I had to regroup and come up with a different plan. Well, the lighting fail was kind of frustrating, and I'm taking a break from that because today there's supposed to be a total solar eclipse, but that'll be a nice break while I'm trying to not be super frustrated over the lighting. It's already getting dark. You can see the eclipse all over the ground. It totally feels like it's nighttime. Although, like, my phone is making it seem like it's bright, it is dark out in the middle of the day, which is so strange. So very cool event. Thanks for sharing this with me. Now that we've all been mooned, I can get back to my new plan regarding the lights. So I've decided I'm not going to go with the LEDs that change colors and can move to music. I'm going to go ahead and stick with the same lights I used in the captain's quarters. The wires are going to be a lot smaller. It's going to be less obtrusive? No, I don't know what the word is there. It's going to be less in your face that there are just wires everywhere. I reprinted the same lamps just a little bit smaller, and then I decided to use pony beads on the inside and on the outside. This is going to keep my LEDs in place so that they aren't moving around inside the lamp, and it's going to be easier for me to glue them down. So I'm adding one on the inside, which is holding the LED, and then one on the outside, which looks a little bit more like the back of a lamp should, in my opinion. Once the glue had dried, I'm just going to use some black paint and go over the outside of the lamp. In my reference, I can see that the inside is supposed to stay white and the exterior is black, which makes the painting job a lot easier for me. To start the process of attaching the lamp heads to the lamp stand, I need to add some barbecue skewers with tacky glue. I'm going to allow those to dry in the loops I added to the edge of each lamp head, and then I can start to paint them all black to blend in with everything else. At this point, I still wasn't quite sure how I was going to attach all of this together, but then I got the idea to use a sewing pin. I'm hoping to use this in a similar way that you would use a bolt in real life. I'm marking off where I want the two pieces of wood to connect, and then I'm going to use a hand drill to drill through the wood skewer that's attached to the lamp. Likewise, I'm going to drill through the pole that is already connected to the bed, and I'm making sure to drill in the angle that I want the bolt to enter into this piece of wood. My bolt, being my sewing pin, is going to go through the lamp first, and then I can connect it into the rod that's coming out of the bed, and just play around with it, make sure that I like the angle that it's moving at. I am going to do this for all three pieces. I'm going to drill everything first because as I add in the lamp heads, it's going to be much more difficult to get a drill piece in there. So drilling everything first was key. The next part of the process was very long because I had to wait for each piece to dry in place. I added glue to the sewing pin, pushed it in, and then used the holes in my 1, 2, 3 blocks to keep the angle that I wanted for my lamp. I had to let this dry all the way until I started messing with the second lamp. Even though you still see the blocks there, it was mostly dry before I moved on to this next step because I just didn't want to risk ripping anything off. I followed the same exact steps by adding the 1, 2, 3 blocks and letting it dry. Once I had the first two lamps in place, I could use some wire cutters to cut off the ends of the sewing pins, and thankfully I was also able to glue the other ends of the lamps at the back of the bed together to help give the lamps even more support. I could then add the third one into the center, and you can kind of see, I'm almost off camera, I'm adding a bit of string back there to help support that one as well. At this point, the wires were sticking up and looking a little bit unnatural, so I used the heat from the end of my glue gun to push the wire down in a more natural direction. As you can see, the middle one is going up like in an arch. I want it to have a little bit more weight to it, so I just heated up the plastic a little bit, not enough so it melted, but just enough so that I could bend the wires down so it looked like they were going straight down the back of the bed. Right after I did that, I wanted to make sure I didn't damage any of the wires, so Mr. Technology found me this battery that I could use to temporarily light up each light and make sure that the wires work. And I was so excited to see this. I think it looks so good. It definitely looks like a bedtime lamp you would use to read, even though they're still really large and I printed them even smaller. It's just definitely a Beetlejuice look. Everything is oversized. I added a few more pieces of paper to hold those wires in place. I painted them black, and then the bed was done for now. Eventually, I will have to add the wires into the central wiring for the entire dollhouse, but here it is in Lydia's room. I'm pretty happy with how it looks, and now it's time to move on to the next piece of furniture that's going to sit right here between the bed and the bathroom. The bed is finally done. I wish the LED changing color lights would have worked out. They didn't, but that's okay. I still learned a lot during the soldering process, and I am going to keep these because at least these two work, and maybe I'll find another place in the project I can use them. Because the fit of this bed in the room is so tight, I am going to have to make a custom dresser that fits between the bed and the door frame to the bathroom. I want to make it still look like the one in the movie, it's just going to be a little thinner. And I've decided to create the pattern and give it to you for free as a free pattern download. It will be in the description box below if you want to make it for yourself. It's just going to be super simple, no working drawers, it's just going to be basically a decorative box. I tried to lay out everything pretty straightforward here on my screen. There is a top and a bottom, or a base, and they consist both of two pieces. One is smaller, so it goes on either the top or the bottom, however you want to apply these, and lines up on one edge so that you have a reveal around three edges. They go together exactly the same, but one is the top of the dresser and one is the base. I am sanding the edges because I want them to be a little bit more rounded just for the look of my dresser. There are two side pieces and they're both the long, thin rectangles. I'm going to glue those now to the back piece. The back is the large rectangle. The front is another large rectangle, but it has the drawer fronts on it. I glued both sides to the face of the back, let that dry, and now I'm going to glue the front on. So I have four pieces that are glued together, making kind of an open box where you can see through the inside. Now I can add glue to the bottom of this piece and then glue it onto the base. I'm lining it up with the back so that the part that has the reveal goes all around the front of the dresser. Here is how it looks so far. The top is going to go on kind of in the reverse so that the smaller piece is toward the dresser construction and it has more of like the top of a column look to it where it fans out at the top. Before adding on my fake drawers, I'm going to lightly sand around the edges to give them a more rounded look. And then I have pre-drilled holes, however you can drill these once the drawer is already applied. Because I pre-drilled them, I had a hard time lining them up because there was a hole in the drawer and in the dresser. So I just used a sewing pin to line them up and make sure that the holes connect. And I don't have to re-drill them when it comes to putting the handles onto the dresser. So I lined them up in the engraved areas, and then I decided I wanted to add some feet onto this dresser because it does look like there are feet on the one that is in the reference. So that was a very quick and easy basic construction for this dresser, and we will come back to it later. I want to match the paint of the dresser to the next piece of furniture that I'm going to create, so I'm not going to paint it at this time, but you will see it again very soon. In the movie, there is a scene where Lydia is writing a very dramatic letter.
I am utterly alone.
And I always thought she was writing this letter at a desk. I never really paid attention to what that desk was. I think it's actually more like a vanity. It's dark, so it's hard to see, but once I really looked at what this piece of furniture was, I was incredibly intimidated to try and recreate it. Thankfully, one of my patrons, Julia, was able to find a better photo of this actual piece of furniture, so that was really helpful throughout this entire process. I already knew there was going to be so much draping with fabric that had to happen, so I decided to create the base of this furniture from plastic, aka 3D printed. The water content that I think I'm going to have to use could have possibly warped mat board, which I really like to use in my furniture, so this just seemed the most logical way forward for me. I designed this piece in Tinkercad, and then I decided to print it on the Neptune 4 Pro. This is a machine that Elegoo sent to me quite a while ago. It works so fast, and in fact it went so fast that I decided to print two more that I'm going to do a giveaway with, so stay tuned to the end of this video for more information on that. And after I had already decided to do my giveaway, Elegoo got in contact with me and said, hey, we actually want to give away a printer to one of your viewers. So there's also going to be an Elegoo giveaway for a Neptune 4 Pro. The same machine that printed these vanities is also going to be given away from Elegoo. So again, stay tuned to the end of the video for that information. So let's get started on the vanity. If you watch my videos, you know how much I love brown, which is why I had brown filament put into the printer. However, by the end of this section of the video, this will be a very yellow vanity. I clicked the pieces together. Thankfully, the design worked out well when it was printed, and used tacky glue to permanently put the mirror in place. Then I could start the daunting task of trying to figure out how I am going to get this draped fabric look. I grabbed some yellow fabric because it's going to be yellow in the end anyway, and started to play around with it, and I realized very quickly that with my regular human hands, it was going to be hard to get perfect drapes. Thankfully, Rachel, my very kind moderator, had sent me this pretty pleater that is made by Deanne Ruff, and it is created to make perfect small pleats in fabric for miniatures. So I read through the directions and started to work on my pleats. It's kind of a rubber mat with a lot of ridges, so you use these two little cards to push the fabric in between the rubber ridges, and then because of the texture of the rubber, it holds it in place as you work through the fabric. Now, I did find that if I started to mess up somewhere, it would pop back out. So I decided to use this mixture of PVA glue and water that I already had sitting on my desk to spray down the fabric. This gave the fabric a little bit more texture, and I felt like it stuck into the rubber mat a little bit better. I could move a little quicker, and I only wet a little bit of the fabric at a time, but as I did, I started to see the pleats, and I was just hoping that this was going to be enough pleats to make it through the entire vanity. This is actually a really fun process. I had never done this before, and it does make very perfect pleats. I don't know how to do the top or bottom to where they look very nice yet. I imagine you just kind of cut it off. I haven't read all the directions. I will probably do that in the future, but for now it will work for my process. After everything dried completely, it came out very stiff and ready to be cut into individual pieces to be applied to the vanity. I used my reference photo to try and figure out how many pleats I needed per section, but then I just decided to go for it and figure it out as I went along. Thankfully, the glue water mixture had made the fabric stiff enough that it was pretty easy to work with, and I wasn't worried about it losing its shape. I just added glue where I knew I needed it to stick to the vanity base and then held it in place. Clips were really helpful for this because it was going to take a while for the tacky glue to solidify. Once I had got it to mostly hold in place, I also went back and added some tacky glue to the top of the folds just to make sure everything was really sticking together and nothing was going to come apart. I also added a little spritz of water just to kind of soften that area of the fabric so it had a more natural drape and there weren't any hard bends. I used the same process for the top of the vanity mirror, and I just went really slow trying to make sure that everything matched and was really even. I have a hard time with symmetry, and you will even see in the end this vanity does not come out perfect, but for me, it's pretty close. I worked pretty hard to make sure those little folds looked right. I'm using a pair of flush cutters to flush the edges of the fabric, and I accidentally cut off a little bit of the desk. So these are pretty powerful little cutters. You have to be careful and make sure you know exactly what you're cutting through because it will take a chunk out of whatever it is. But it cut through the fabric, which I was thankful for because I was a little nervous my scissors wouldn't cut through fabric that thick. After the center drape was finished, I could work on the side drapes that ended up covering the front legs of the vanity. It is sitting at an angle at the very bottom of the fabric, and I didn't quite duplicate this exactly, but I do feel like it's close enough to give you an idea of what the vanity is. I added some more tacky glue, and then I very carefully tried to cut an exact duplicate of this piece, but in a mirror image so it could go on the other side of the vanity. Every time I added a new section of fabric, I make sure to go over it with some tacky glue so that it's all blended in and glued together really well. On the upper part of the vanity, on the sides of where the mirror is going to be, I added fabric just like I did on the lower part, except I fanned it out just a little bit more, and I really liked how that looked. I cut the bottom of it at a slight angle so it hit the top of the desk permanently because I do plan to blend it into the desk in the future. Once I was happy with everything, it was time to mold the little pieces of fabric at the bottom. I wanted it to flare out when it hit the ground, so I wet it down with a little bit more water and tacky glue and then let it dry on my desk, and that held the folds of the fabric perfectly. To fill in some of my imperfections and make the fabric look like it is all molded together, I'm using some puffy paint. The first thing I'm filling in is that section where I cut a piece off of the desk, and then I'm going to use this paint to blend the folds of the upper part of the fabric into the vanity surface. This is going to take a little bit of water and a paintbrush just to make it look really smooth. After all, this whole piece of furniture is supposed to look like carved marble, like it's one big monument or statue that's carved to look like fabric. And so that is why I am doing this extra step to try and get that effect. I was also able to fill in some extra folds of fabric that were empty from behind that in the future might be crushed if it was handled a little bit too much. I filled it full of this puffy paint and now it can hold its shape. To continue blending these pieces together, first of all to make sure that the fabric is really stiff and won't move, also to make sure it looks like one piece and all has one texture, I am using wood glue all over the surface of everything. All over the fabric and the surface of the 3D printed material. This project had so much dry time, I can't even explain how many times I had to set this piece aside to dry. But finally, we are on to the painting process. I am going to be putting a solid coat of gesso over everything. This is going to help give a more even base to put the final color on. Thankfully, I had the perfect color already in my collection of paint. I'm going to be using this sunflower yellow from Folk Art to go over the vanity and the dresser that I previously put together in this video. I think it is such a beautiful light color, which is so funny that that is the color it's supposed to be when it's in such a dark room. But I do think the set designers realized they had to have some kind of light color in there, and this is such a weird yellow to add with the purples and blacks and the green floor, honestly, that for some reason it just works. To continue on with the marble statuesque look, I am highlighting the folds of the fabric. This is just something I felt like I saw in the reference photo, and I felt like it really brought out that texture. As you can see, it's definitely not perfect, but I think the folds are as close as I am probably going to get doing it by hand. If it is something I could have modeled in 3D, I may have tried that, but I don't have that skill level yet. I put a glossy finish on this vanity and it was not quite done yet. I thought we were done. No, we have to add a mirror because this is a vanity. So I'm going to be using some mirror paper. I traced out the shape of the mirror on some mat board. And one thing I used to hate about this mirror paper, but I actually kind of like now, it doesn't matter how flat I try to get this paper, it always looks bubbly. But for me, I don't like having a perfect mirror in the dollhouse because I don't like the real world being reflected back to me. So I kind of like the bubbly look and we're just gonna go with it. I added tacky glue to the inside of the vanity frame and I had just partially pulled up the film so that I didn't get any glue on the frame, but once I was happy with it in place, I could pull the rest of the film off and voila, we now have a vanity with a reflective mirror, even if it is a little bubbly. To finish off the dresser, I wanted to add some handles, and I found these little white seed beads. They're not quite as small as like those little tiny ones, but they were the perfect size to put a sewing pin through, and I think it gave a really refined look without having to put too much effort into these. I just added the sewing pin into the dresser, and thankfully the dresser was deep enough that I didn't even have to cut the sewing pin. I will definitely be ordering some more beads like this because these were the easiest drawer handles I've ever made and I really like how they look. So finally, we can put everything back in place. We have the bed with the very skinny dresser right next to it, next to the bathroom, and then Lydia's vanity with, of course, a couple cameras on there. I did design the Polaroid camera. I found the Nikon online, so I will put a link to that in the description box below if you want to find that for yourself. I had planned to paint those and make some other camera accessories in this video, but I just did not realize how much I was going to fight with the lighting, so it took me a little longer than I thought. And don't forget, if you would like to be entered into the vanity giveaway, There's a chance for 2 winners each to both win one vanity base and a little Polaroid camera. Whether you're making your own room for Lydia or your dolls themselves would really enjoy a Polaroid camera, it will be coming in the giveaway. I decided I had to set up a faux room. I just wanted to see how these pieces would look against a dark wallpaper and a dark green floor, even though it doesn't look green. It is green, but it's like green checkers. And I totally am in love with this set. It's so weird, especially with the bed, but I cannot wait to make the wallpaper and all the finishes that are going to go inside this room. And especially when the lights start coming on with the dramatic lighting and everything, I think it'll be a space that Lydia would really, really like. But I will have to make her a different outfit, maybe her black outfit, because the red is just kind of clashing with the whole thing. It's not really working. I do have one house to share with you that was sent in for the Beetlejuice project. This was made by Selena and Delilah. It is a miniature copy of the dollhouse they are building together. Thank you for sending it in. Lydia's furniture was way more complicated than I originally thought it would be. Even at the beginning of this project, when I was looking at the reference photos, I thought it would go kind of quickly, but between the dry times and the struggle with the wiring, it just took a lot more time than I thought, and I didn't get to as many accessories as I wanted to. However, when I get to the video where I work on her wallpaper and floors, I will be doing more accessories in that video to wrap up the entire room, so it's perfect for Lydia. So there's lots of reminders I need to go over at the end of this video. Lots of exciting things. All of it is going to be in the description box, which can be found below the title of this video. Make sure you're on a phone or a desktop in order to see it. I don't think you can look at it on the TV. Oftentimes there's a little arrow, or you just click somewhere in the box and it will open up so you can see all the links. There's going to be a link for a free download for the pattern of the dresser. There's going to be a Google form for the vanity giveaway. I'm going to draw 2 winners for that, and that is done through me. So I will be able to announce the winners of the 2 different vanities on my community tab in a week's time from the upload of this video. And finally, there is the giveaway of the Neptune 4 Pro from Elegoo. That is run by Elegoo, and I have put their links down below in the description box so you can check out that giveaway and possibly win yourself a free 3D printer. And I will also be putting a link to the Saturn 4 Ultra. Thank you so much, Elegoo, for sending me the Saturn 4 Ultra to review. The prints were beautiful. It was super easy to use. Thank you so much for continuing to support my channel with these printers. It was so fun to get back into the Beetlejuice project, and I cannot wait to completely finish up Lydia's room. I think the wallpaper meshed with the very quirky furniture is really just going to make it a unique space. So stay tuned for that video and several other videos I have in mind coming up. I'm continuing to take my time and post them when I can, so make sure you're subscribed and have the notifications turned on, and you'll be sure to be here whenever a new video comes out. I hope you all have an amazing week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Do you need screen time? Give me 1 minute. 1 minute. See the green light Mr. Technology installed? I can also change the color somehow, but I don't know how. Are you ready to come up? Yeah, what are you gonna do? You gotta make the furniture. Make the furniture right here. Make it on the table. Do I have to make it again? Okay.